I've sympathy with some candidates whose careers have been really quite broad. You can still get obviously great roles with that profile, but probably you're more likely to get those roles with people who already know you or have a reason they want to talk to you outside of that generalization. Because if somebody doesn't know you, that generalization, that sort of handle on your career is hard to get cold, and more likely they're going to pass over you in favor of someone who looks a straighter line to success.
If you are a candidate thinking about taking a job that is a bit of a sidestep, think about what that means for your career and your next move as well, or what that's saying on your profile. My advice generally is don't just take the job because you need the job. You have to really think about where that's taking you in your career path.
Hello and welcome to Mission 1, The Executive Edge. I'm your co-host, Gerard from the UK, and I'm also joined by Dan Hampton from Miami. Dan, how you doing?
Doing great. Yeah, I appreciate it. It's been a busy last couple of weeks and everything's going well. How about you?
I'm well, actually. Yeah, we're okay here in the UK. We actually get proper seasons, so we're very much entering into the autumn season or the fall season, as you guys call it. Do you call it autumn over in Miami, or was it?
Yeah, autumn or fall. Yeah, but we don't really have that here. Like, it's still hot every day. We have kind of the rainy season and the non-rainy season.
The rainy season, the non-rainy season, exactly. So we used to call it Michaelmas sometimes, but I don't know where that phrase comes from. It seems to have died a death. You're shaking your head.
It's not a thing over
here. We used to have the Michaelmas term. It sounds like it's out of Harry Potter, as I said out loud, but there we are. Wanted to say ahead, before we get into the meat of the podcast this week, which is continuing our mini-series on the executive search, effectively, how do you go and get a job? How do you go get that top job? Want to say a big thank you to all the listeners. Our first two episodes have been out for about 2-3 weeks now, and we've received over 10,000 views and listens across the two episodes. So we're both humbled and really excited by that reception, and we hope that the viewers are getting a lot of value, and please do keep giving us feedback. And as I said, Dan, I want to say a big thank you to everyone for anyone who's listened, subscribed, and liked as we've been on this journey.
Yeah, thanks everyone for listening, and thanks for the feedback. And we'll look forward to putting out more episodes and hope you find them as or more informative.
Great. And this week, Dan, do you want to tell us what we're going to be talking about?
Yeah, so this week is the second part of our kind of 3-part series. And this week we're going to be talking about, the approach to the job search. And, what that means is we'll be talking about kind of how you present yourself to the market, a tactical approach to networking, and, how to inform yourself or why you should inform yourself, your industry or domain and trends and those kinds of things.
Excellent. So last week it was the prep, and now it's about the application as you're looking for those very top sought after roles. We're here to give you some of that practical advice on what to do now you've taken all the advice of preparation. Dan, jumping into our first topic then about presenting yourself to the market, I think as headhunters, we often get asked this a lot, to look at a CV, ask about the importance of LinkedIn. That's the sort of the window, the professional window you're putting yourself up in if you're looking for a job or open to passively being approached about a job. LinkedIn, resume, Dan, how important are these things in the modern job search?
Yeah, I mean, that's a loaded question right off. So we get asked about this, as you know, all the time. Hey, do I need a resume? I don't have an active resume. Does that matter? Sometimes clients asking for the resume, and then sometimes just questions about the profile. My quick answer is, LinkedIn profile matters, infinitely more than the resume. Resume is good for context. I don't advise, candidates at the very senior levels. And this is advice for the senior levels, not, resume probably matters a lot more for a junior IC role. But at senior executive levels, I don't think the resume really matters. I think the LinkedIn profile, if you're showing enough detail, plus an interview, being able to answer questions in interviews, plus all the other things that happen later, are vastly more important. What's your take on that?
I think certainly, to call it out, the direction of travel clearly is towards LinkedIn profiles. When we started headhunting 15 years ago, CVs were mandatory. We were expected to collect them for every candidate. Clients would want to review them. Nowadays, you're sending update emails, you're including a LinkedIn link, and most clients are happy with this. If the LinkedIn resume is sparse, then they might ask for a PDF or some other document that goes into detail. So at the highest level, absolutely LinkedIn profile, get it up to date. Yes. However, I think there's still a place for the CV. And certainly some clients will like that, particularly perhaps more traditional clients. So companies that tend to be sort of older companies, for want of a better word. If you're dealing with a very young tech startup, then probably they're not asking for CVs. But if you're applying for a job at Microsoft or Adobe, I think it's much more likely that these guys will ask for a CV, or somebody in that process might want to see one. And what would you, thinking about that, what you're putting on either a LinkedIn profile or a CV, Dan, what's the key information to get onto that document?
A great point. Oh, by the way, look, certain older companies will have different cultures, different process, different things they need, and that may include the resume. I can see that. I think that's a great point. I think if you're going for an innovative company, probably less so. I mean, obviously less so. What's important? What I look for on a profile is track record, career progression, upward ascension. It doesn't have to be overly detailed, but it needs to give me or the interviewer or anyone interested kind of a very good idea about where you've been and what you've been doing, and showing the title progression. If you were, if you're going for a startup and you were early at a company, that's important to show, hey, I was the 10th hire, I was the first product hire, I was the first, whatever, early in your career. That's really important to articulate as well. Domain experts that are recruiting in your space are going to know, okay, this person was at, Snap in 2017. That's important. This person was at, another company, Scopely in 2013 or, what have you, that was important, that kind of thing. So, knowing, years are important, but I think that's, I don't know. Do you think you can go too far with details? Like, what are you typically looking for, Gerard, in terms of our candidate profile at a first glance?
I think on a LinkedIn profile, key data points around team size, the functions that reported into you, the scope of ownership are really useful. And I think you're sort of thinking about who's going to be looking at this. It's either the hiring manager themselves, someone on their exec recruiting team, or an external headhunter are probably the three types of people who'll be looking at your profile with that view. And they will have, taking it back a step, they're going to have quite a specific set of briefs and criteria that they're looking for. So making it super easy for them to understand the functions that you've run, the scale of the P&L you've been managing or been working within, geographical reach. Who do you report into as well? That can be really helpful to understand where you sit in the organization, saying you're reporting into the CEO or the C-level currently, or is a regional GM, can just help give a sense of ownership, and again, how well your profile might map to a particular role, and that's going to increase excitement. You can kind of have a school of thought that, hey, if you're too specific, maybe you're ruling yourself out for a role. But the other side of that is, often if somebody's approaching you, as said, that they've often got very specific criteria. And if they spend a lot of energy getting to know you and then find out you've not got the right criteria they're looking for, then you're probably just wasting your own time versus being really razor-like focus for the people who are looking for your profile. So I think that would be, some of that detail and data is helpful. Dan, just about historical track record, because some people can also get trapped into, they've got a lot of CV to convey, as it were, a lot of background to convey. How much balance would you say between doing more recent achievements versus going back to the early days of your career and also sort of highlighting, or even not early days, but maybe sort of 10, 15 years ago, what you're up to? What do you think the balance should be on time and details?
The more recent roles are the most relevant. Really, the last 10 years of a career are most relevant. However, 20 years ago, doing something is also still kind of important in understanding just the foundation, where you were, track record and brands associated with you, overall pedigree, is important. But really, the last 10 years, most important, being able to articulate kind of what you worked on in those years, is helpful. you can be, I understand there's sensitive detail out there, sensitive metrics that people don't want to share, and that's okay too. You can save that for a call, but baseline really is showing kind of 10 years progression. If you can articulate any detail around a project you worked on, a product you worked on, some kind of initiative, that's helpful because you're trying to figure out, as we talked about, or you mentioned, I think you said this in the last episode, companies are hiring you based off a challenge you've already done that they're, encountering today. So being able to articulate that is important, right? Understanding your candidate fit in the market and helping companies see that is the easiest way to get an interview in the door, really, I think. What would you say to that?
I think your point around the historical context, I see that as the training. If you're going back earlier in your career, there's some really good training schools that you might want to highlight. And by that, I mean companies which just are well known for processes, well known for giving you the right tools or analytical capabilities, the right ways of looking at a problem. That also a lot of people went on from those companies to do great things across the industry. So that can be really helpful for highlighting that grounding you had to your career, but what you actually did 15 years ago in starting up the LATAM office or something like that, you're the first person out there, probably is going to be too historical to be of great relevancy because people say, well, LATAM's changes the market to 20 years ago. So, okay, but it's not really exciting me. So you said 10 years. I think that's right. I would say last 5 years, even more, with even more highlight. And there can be sometimes an error or a perception error that candidates make that if they solved a problem 10 to 12 years ago, they can say, look, I'm right for this role because I've seen this before. I know how that works. Again, I would encourage people to understand that often in the client's eyes, they're not putting as much weight on those experiences. So to you as a candidate, you might feel, hey, I've done this before. I know this exactly. But actually, you could be almost losing credibility in pushing that with a client, because if it's historical, they might be saying, is it rightly or wrongly? That would be our experience and understanding that. And it's better to find a more recent example, even if it's less impressive, and maybe tied into a more historical example, but more recent experiences are going to hold more weight and water with an interviewer. Dan, what another area I want to talk about is, and we sort of talked about this before, is that sort of sense of giving focus or giving a sense of specialization or superpower, as the Americans like to call it. I think that's right. They've talked about what's your superpower, to get that fit in the market. Any advice on how to highlight that in your LinkedIn profile, resume, or should you? What's your thoughts on being sort of specialized versus being very general?
I think you should. I think it is very difficult for recruiters to understand a generalist type of background, one that, is very good. But if a recruiter can't see a straightforward way, typically, not all recruiters, but typically if someone can't see a straightforward way through your career, they're not going to quite understand the fit or if it's a strong enough fit. So articulating some level of specialization, articulating a straightforward path is the easiest way to getting your foot in the door for an interview, getting the phone call, then articulating kind of this broader skill set. But you're still getting hired for kind of a specific gap anyway. So if you can align yourself to that gap, that's most important. That's my general guidance. But how do you see it?
I agree with that. I think sometimes, and I have sympathy with some candidates whose careers have been really quite broad, and they sort of say, I was doing what I was asked, right? I was fixing whatever problem was thrown at me. Or they say or move between functions in sort of niche roles within a corporation. And they sometimes struggle to articulate that, and they want to stay broad. I think, again, not to demoralize people, you can still get obviously great roles with that profile, but probably you're more likely to get those roles with people who already know you or have a reason they want to talk to you outside of that generalization. Because if somebody doesn't know you, that generalization, that sort of handle on your career is hard to get cold, and more likely they're going to pass over you in favor of someone who looks a straighter line to success. So if you are someone sat there thinking, well, it's hard to almost define what I do because I do a bit of everything, or I can do everything, I'm a Swiss Army knife, then I'd almost encourage you to taper that down when you're first engaging with people and understanding, okay, what are you looking for? Well, I'm looking for someone who's got expertise in this market or this function. Okay, just talk about that. You don't need to tell them you can do another 10 things aside. If that's the role you want, it might not be the role you want, but if it's a role you're excited for, really keep just honing in on that and saying, hey, I've done a bunch of other stuff, but yeah, let me make this super clear to you. These are the 3 examples I've got of solving that specific problem and at this sort of scale. So I think this is relevant, rather than also, layering on the fact you could do 5 other things that they're not looking for. I think that would be my thoughts.
I would add to that as well, this is kind of inside baseball, but if you are a candidate thinking about taking a job that is a bit of a, sidestep or not a direct path to where you want to go, think about what that means for your career and your next move as well, or what that's saying on, in your profile. You may be successful doing this other thing that is not a straightforward path to the direction you're going. But if you're not, that could hurt you. But even if you are, that may prevent you from getting, back on track some level. So my advice generally is don't just take the job because you need the job. You have to really think about where that's taking you in your career path long term, not just today as well.
That's the story of the career, right? And I think that just is a theme we keep coming up is what's the narrative? What's the story? And if it's not easy for somebody else to understand, if it requires a lot of articulation and the more you've got to articulate it, right, the more risk or doubt is going to creep into the mind of someone who's looking at your profile or your resume. And I think that's a really good point. If you are pivoting around different functions, just be aware that might come at the cost of a harder to understand CV, which at some point might catch up to you. And again, all these things are solvable, or all these things doesn't mean that there's not the right job out for you. But again, if you're really focused on specific goals long term, then you've got to be tactical in your moves as sort of really getting to that top ladder. It doesn't often just happen by accident. It happens with some focus or strategy around it. And thinking about this, Dan, in context of presenting to yourself to the market, should we talk now about networking and the importance of, you've got your LinkedIn profile set up, you've got your resume, you've got your story straight, as it were, of what you do really well. Now it's time to be more proactive and convert that preparation work into activating your network. Dan, what might be some good tips for somebody to do, first of all, when we start thinking about activating your network to help in that job search?
I think I get this question at least once a week in terms of someone looking for a job. They're not really sure the approach. They have a LinkedIn profile. Maybe they have a resume all ready to go as well. And now where do they go from here? Because these jobs are hidden as well, right? So I tell candidates to essentially engage in a four-pronged approach to networking. So, and we can touch on all of these, but just a high level, it's understanding your network or networking with your personal network, networking with executive recruiters, networking with the companies you admire directly as well, right? And the talent partners there, or your potential boss there, or someone you admire there. And then also networking with investors, right? If you want to be in a venture space, if you want to be in a private equity space, getting connected to those portfolio companies is also important too. But that's generally what the guidance I give is, okay, well, you have to go and network with these 4 different groups. And here's the approach. Do you get the same guidance? Are you thinking about it differently, or do you prioritize kind of one over the other?
I think with all these things, there'll be nuance in the individual situation. And I think it falls around those 4 categories, right? Of understanding either the value you've either got in your network that you've probably been building up over your career and activating that, or thinking about, again, new avenues like investors, or being more targeted with certain companies, or building your network with executive headhunters. So I think those are the right 4 groups there. And Dan, so thinking about that first one then, the personal network. Somebody, let's take a fictional candidate X, and they're thinking, okay, I really haven't been looking for a job for a long time. And suddenly I've been at my current company for 8 years, starting to think, what else could there be out there? But I'm just rusty and I don't really know where to start. What would be a good place to start on that personal network, and what should they start thinking about?
Absolutely. So, I mean, definitely start with warm connections, start with friends that you used to work with, former coworkers that are elsewhere now, just kind of get a sense of what's happening in your industry, in your domain, what's going on out there, what companies are exciting. If you've been heads down, you probably don't know or haven't been too aware of what's happening in these other companies, at least not deeply. So just get connected to old mentors, old bosses, old peers, old reports that you're still friendly with and warm with, and just, start there, right? Start articulating the story, start just getting activating that muscle, I think.
Yeah, and I was going to say, and to the purpose of not just saying hello, but also, or even just saying, hey, are there any jobs, right? That's the sort of base level. But I think it's also about using it as a real intelligence gathering exercise. And the questions you should be asking are getting more insight into the market. So, where is the money flowing? What are the challenges you're consistently seeing in your organization or your function? Who's been on a hiring spree? Who's been shedding people? Who needs to turn around, right? Like who's just been acquired and there's a lot of uncertainty about X or Y, or is very hot right now to get into the EMEA market? What North American company has been talking a lot about getting into EMEA or into Asia or wherever it is, right? And using that, not as I said, at one level, catching up with people is going to help you get a sense of the market, just sort of generally start to feel a little bit more external to your role, and getting into that mind place where you're looking externally rather than just internally with your job, but also getting that sense of intel and information, which you can then feed back into your targeting, your further targeting of your network, right? Who are you going to go then target once you've gathered all this information? Who do you need to network with now? Who's that old friend you need to go check in with to prioritize your connected with, because you heard that they're in a super hot space, right? Their value has gone up in terms of their insights that you need to receive.
Yeah. I mean, I would also just want to mention, even if you aren't looking for a role, actively today, or you aren't looking for a role in the foreseeable future, you should continue networking with your personal network. That should be an ongoing thing. Keep it warm. Don't just activate it when you need something. Keep those lines of communication open and stay close. I like what you're saying about getting inside of the market as well. I think that's important. I think that should be an ongoing thing, right? Sharing knowledge, getting out there, understanding what's happening, the trends, who's thinking about what, who's expanding. Maybe that there's an opportunistic hire you're not even aware of.
And to your point, Dan, about keeping that network active even when you're not looking, the reality is with these level of roles is it's so much about timing. And the chances of you saying, right, I'm now looking for my next role, and that next role being available within a reasonable time period from you wanting to look for it, is kind of up to chance, right? You might get lucky, but there's also potentially a strong chance that it's not going to align. Kind of role, kind of company may have just hired that person, 3 months or 6 months before you decided, or might not be about to hire a person for another 6 or 12 months or something like that. So it's through sort of keeping that network, through keeping in the mind of people, you might stumble across things when you're not looking, but you suddenly say, wow, this is the kind of role makes me start to want looking, right? Like so I wasn't looking, but now I've heard about this role, that's really opened up my mind. And maybe you go and get that role, or maybe just the realization that role's out there. You think, oh, actually, there's a moment here. There's an interest in my expertise, which I wasn't even aware of. I need to take advantage. So I need to capitalize on this because things are moving. And if I stay still, my current org for 6, 12 months, I might miss out on that opportunity. So that's a good incentive to keep that network alive, not just for when you're actively looking, but it also might throw up roles you never even heard of or considered into your orbit.
Yeah, great point around the timing of it. These roles are very few and far between, very opportunistic on the timing. So it can't just be when you need the role. There may be something exciting that comes up when you're not expecting it. And, many of the candidates we approach aren't very happy in their active roles. They can be compelled by something that's exciting that they just didn't have time to really think about. And then that turns into the next great career move for them as well.
And I think we see that a lot actually with candidates who we engage with. They say, the start of process, I'm not looking, I'm not in anything active. But then by the end of a process, they sort of say, actually, this has got me thinking. Now I have started interviewing with one place. It's got me thinking, actually, do I want to make a move? Right? It starts that sort of brain process and that sort of state of mind that even if they don't get that job that maybe we've been talking to them about, you often see at some future point they've gone down the road further with interviews and either taken another job or at least ruled it in or out through multiple processes. So it can, I think being aware of that in your own space, and again, maybe you don't want that, right? Maybe you're saying, actually, I don't want to be distracted, but we can surprise ourselves. It will be just something that we've observed through hearing about jobs, even if you're not in the mind space of you'd want to move subconsciously or otherwise. You might find actually when it comes along, that lights something inside of you. Dan, talking about everyone's favorite subject, I presume, which is headhunters and people like ourselves, that networking with headhunters. I think we're going to do a more specific podcast entirely on this subject at some point. But for those who can't wait and want a little bit of a teaser on networking with headhunters, what would be some top tips on how to use people like ourselves?
Yeah, I think, and we can talk forever, I think, on this topic. We encounter people constantly that aren't really sure how to engage with headhunters, if they should, when they should, who even is in their space. I think doing some research on who are the specialists in your area, like who are the specialists in consumer tech and games and that kind of thing, and connecting with them and building a relationship, even if you're not looking for a role. I think more recently I've been encountering candidates that are a bit more savvy about this, and they're incredibly happy in their roles. They're proactive. They just want to start building a relationship. They're not actually looking, but they understand the timing could be challenging. And also, I think just last week I met somebody who was very unaware of the relationship with a headhunter and wanted to know if there was some kind of exclusivity or if they should engage with just one, and just talking them through around the fact that there isn't, that exclusivity, and they should. My top tip is really get to know every specialist executive recruiter in your space, if there's, depending on how many there are, and usually there's not that many who are really specialized and know the space but get to know them, get to at least the ones that you feel like you can trust, and generally build relationships with the ones that are focused on the retained space of it.
And Dan, just to jog and bust there a little bit, and I'm sure some of our listeners will be very, very familiar with this terminology, but I think there was 2 points I wanted to pick out there. So first was about specialist and generalist, and again, people understand this concept, but to double down, that's really important, right? Like understanding who are specialists in your areas versus the people who might say they're specialists or say they cover it. How do you counsel someone who's trying to work out which are the right headhunters I need to know and target?
I'd love to get your take on this as well. Generally, there are recruiters out there who will work on many functions, and there are recruiters out there who will work on one or two or maybe three at most functions, and really kind of get to know and specialize in those. I think the fewer you can specialize in, or the fewer you specialize in, the more time you have to build relationships with the candidate set there and really develop kind of candidate expertise, but also your own kind of functional expertise with the companies involved. So I think the fewer domains, the fewer functions you focus on, the better. But there are certainly some that'll focus on every function and take on every role, and that presents its own challenges. I probably didn't give the best definition of that. What's your take?
I think we see people getting fatigued by contact with headhunters just because they talk to a lot of generalists who don't really understand their particular area, and that can lead to them getting turned off. And you can see people they really enjoy it when they think they're talking to someone who really understands their area and has the context and starts mentioning people in common, or they say, I used to work here, and you say, I used to work with, Joe or Fred or Shanine or whatever it is, right? And they say, oh, you know that person, right? And you think you can see that is a more pleasant experience for the executive. So going around and understanding, okay, who's got a good reputation in my market and who's been working with the right kind of companies that I want to go work with can save you a lot of time. And you can get that information sometimes through just research and proactivity on websites and search, etc. You could also go and get it from peers and people you know and say, well, go to kind of company you want to join, or if you see them at a conference or something like that, say, hey, when you're hiring for that top, the top people in sales or engineering, do you have headhunters you work with? Is there anyone you trust? Because once you start knowing who are the trusted voices and who are working with the top people in your industry, then you can be a lot more targeted around making sure you're on their radar and thinking about that and not just burning a lot of your time and energy, sending your CV for the 18th time into one of the large global headhunting firms, and it's just getting some mashed up or being passed on to some junior who doesn't really understand your profile. So I think you can be more targeted in that way. And Dan, jargon busting, sort of contingent versus retained headhunting, do you just want to articulate that to our listeners as well? What's the difference between headhunters working on a retained basis and contingent basis?
Yeah. So contingent is, those are recruiters that are they essentially get paid on the success of the hire. So they have to move with speed and velocity. Sometimes the company has engaged multiple contingent recruiters, so there's not a lot of time to be savvy in their approach to you, and just to represent you appropriately as well, right? Because they have to move fast before someone else puts your resume in front of this client. Right. And then they have kind of ownership. Retained is when a company engages a specific firm. This is generally more at the senior levels, whereas contingent is more at the kind of the junior, maybe up to mid, sometimes the senior roles, but I shouldn't. The retained world is really more about a company engaging a firm to assess a need, to map the best candidates and approach them very strategically. Like, these are roles that are not advertised. They're more about a conversation leading to a conversation. And it's really more for companies that are trying to attract the best talent, but also be very discreet about it as well.
I think most of the time, VP C-level roles, you'll be dealing with executive retained search firms. I think at that senior director level, if you're looking at those roles, just be careful, because I think that's probably the cutoff. Director, senior director levels, you do see some more contingent firms in there. And again, contingent firms can do great work. It's just different, right? I think it's just understanding that difference of, as you say, it's going to be perhaps more volume-based. It's going to be perhaps quicker to action. They'll drop you a little bit quicker. If you're not right, they want to spend less time and investment in you as a candidate, and you're more part of a sort of machine process. There's perhaps a less of a sort of view for longevity there, just because the way their model is set up. So they're only getting paid on success, and therefore they have to be very efficient with their time, whereas a retained headhunter is getting paid on the project regardless of success. So they're really invested in long-term relationships, really turning over every stone, making sure they've seen every angle and really understood you as a profile. So again, if you're just getting to that first VP levels, you've already experienced more contingent roles, that can just be a surprise for some people of how it works, or just haven't got their head around, like, well, are you guys exclusive on this role? Or, these sorts of questions, they're not quite sure. So it's good to ask these questions. Are they exclusive? Are you a retained search firm? And that can help shape your, if you're being reached out to by somebody, a headhunter, those can be good questions to ask. Or again, if you're looking at a headhunting firm and proactively reaching out to them, asking these questions to understand their profiles a little bit better would be of help.
Can I just say, I just want to double down on the fact that there are, what you just said as well, there are great recruiters in contingent, certainly. My take is that they just have to do a lot more volume, and so can't necessarily represent the search in the same way we will, because we're focused on less volume and just a different approach to the work.
And it's worth as well saying there are agencies out there which will do more candidate representation. So again, sometimes people don't always understand that. So the headhunters are working for the clients, but they're on both sides of the market. So they want to understand you as candidates because you're, for want of a better word, you're sort of the product, right? You're the sort of the connectivity between the job and you as the candidate. There's the middlemen within that. There are agencies out there which will be more, you pay them to go and represent your resume across different jobs, right? So they take the candidate and they try and find the job for them, and they're usually charging you as a candidate. So just be aware of that sort of differentiation as well, that those exist, but headhunters really are working for the client, and they call you up when they've got a role rather than they're not necessarily going to be your proactive champions in the market. So it just helps manage your expectations of how to use them. And again, there's no fee to you when you get placed, right? You don't have to pay anything. Because I've had that question before as well, of like, are you going to get paid if I don't have to pay you money if you find me a job? And it is no to that question from the way that our model works and executive search works.
Yeah, absolutely. We should also talk about approach to companies and then later investors as well. What's your guidance? Candidate comes to you, they're trying to network. There's some companies out there that they just don't know anybody yet, but they really admire. They're right in their space, their competitor, that kind of thing. What's the best approach there?
It's a good question, and probably a multi-pronged approach, depending on the opportunities that exist. So we've talked before. I think cold outreach can be great. Actually, like you can try that. It can be. It's a busy market, LinkedIn, but if you've really identified someone that you want to get on the radar of, send them an open, hey, I just want to network with you, and find a hook. Here's what we do as headhunters, sort of we'll find a hook that shows you've thought about it, shows it's relevant. So it might be, hey, I saw you posting on LinkedIn about this topic. I find that really compelling. I've just done we've just moved to Google Cloud from Azure, and we've just had all these problems that you were talking about, or whatever it is, right? Like find that similarity. I'd love to just get on a radar, to talk about this topic and understand how things are going in your market. So find some sort of level of personalization and hook and relevancy if you're doing a cold outreach. Another way is to get a warm intro. So even if you don't know that right person, that right function, do you have any colleagues who've gone to anywhere in the org, right? You can go and say, hey, I really want to get on the radar of this person. Do you know them? Are they somebody you could help with a warm intro? And if you ask enough people, you'll find who they connected with on LinkedIn. Just look, shared connections, etc. Find that way. Again, going back to headhunters, that can be a route. You can say, I'm really trying to get networked with X. Do you happen to know them? I'd love to get on the radar if yes, because you just nudge them. I got a WhatsApp the other day from somebody about an investor saying, I just saw they just raised a new fund. Do you know them? I happen to know them. Could you just drop them a note? And I said to them, yeah, just draft me, 2 lines on what you want me to send them, and you're very happy to. So thinking proactively again about just different ways of getting in there, or again, conferences as well. If you know someone's going to a conference, it's a bit more expensive, but probably doing it on the company anyway, but it takes more time. But again, sort of using those face-to-face times and building a relationship as well. If you're really trying to build something very transactional, people feel that. If you're just like, hey, I want this job right now, and I'm only talking to you as a method to get into something else, and I think people appreciate that and they can be turned off by that. Whereas actually, if you spent a year or 6 months building this relationship, then the role comes up. It feels much more authentic, and it should be much more authentic in that approach.
I think what you said about just going back to building relationships with headhunters is important, because we often, constantly are helping people that have relationships with us get connected to someone they don't know or company they don't know. Even if we don't have a search, I think our general philosophy has been to try to be that connectivity in the market and help people along the way. My other just maybe add on here for getting connected to companies, if you don't know anybody or no one you know can get you connected, and they're a large company, you can generally simply find the recruiting team on LinkedIn, or if it's a robust recruiting team, find the executive, like whoever's calling out executive recruiter on, in that recruiting team. That's the right person to cold connect with, and then or send a note to and try to get an intro call with. And generally, if they're active in your space, they'll take a call with you anyway. Usually, unless they're just inundated with other things and they don't have the time. But generally, they'll try to build a relationship with you, I would expect.
Yeah, and it can be over time, right? As well, it can be. So they might ignore you today because they're super slammed and everything else, but you can follow up with them in 4, 5, 6 months time, check in, and they might have a sense of guilt. I know I've done that sometimes, that sense of, remember, I failed to reply to you last time, so I'm really going to make sure I spend a bit of time with you even more now, because I have that on my conscience that you contact me at a crazy time and whatever it is. So I think that's helpful. And as you say, understanding that often, again, larger corporations will have someone dealing with the exec recruitment side of things versus the the sort of the more sort of talent side. It's often called a talent versus the exec search professionals within it. So the team that's dealing with the senior director, VP, C-level hires and getting to know them is going to be helpful. Also to get feedback, right? Or get an understanding if you're not, try and get the understanding of like, hey, I've spoken to you for 3 different processes, never got the role. Just tell me, like, what's going on? Is there someone blacklisting me? Like, have I got a negative reference out there? Like, what happened? Did I say something that really like rubbed up the wrong way? Go and get that. Because I think even when you're not getting the job, can tell you information, right? It could give you something valuable. The reality is, again, just sort of dropping the curtain a little bit. These companies will have quite sophisticated notes on you. There'll be colleagues that you've worked with in the past. They'll have referenced you with. You might have no idea they've done that with. There will be notes from previous interviews, formed views, etc. And if you can, try and get that honest feedback because it's going to help you. Even if there's something in there that's negative, or especially if there's something in there that's not flattering, you save yourself the time so you're not keep on applying to that company if they've just sort of said like you're not the right culture fit, whatever that might be. But also it might help you think about something that you're doing or could do to improve your chance of getting the next job or with a different company out there.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Just getting that feedback, because sometimes it could just be in your head, right? They may not be anything. It's just there's something else process related, and that may prevent you from trying to engage them. Or maybe there is something, and you can solve that as well. Just moving on to investors, what's the best approach? What guidance do you give to candidates out there who are trying to get connected on the investor side?
So I think it's understanding again who's relevant, who's got the right portfolio. So that sort of that targeting is useful. So all we've been talking about so far is sort of a pyramid that leads to here as well of, okay, I know that private equity is super hot for this sector right now, and they haven't really done a lot of deals, but if one fund's done one, then you usually find there's another fund looking at doing a similar deal in your sector, right? Because they all get nosy and they're sort of sniffing around the same opportunities. So thinking, okay, well, that sort of understanding, okay, who within that team is the lead on these roles. And you might have to make a connection to find that out. You might have to say, look, be honest, I reached out to you because I think, you're the expert in this field. Is that right? And they might say, no, that's my colleague X or Y, and they pass you on, or you have to go and reach out to them, whatever it is. Being persistent is important with investors. They're quite time poor. They're sort of quite hyper-focused often on the thing that's in front of them. They're doing a deal or whatever pressures is on them. So they're easy to forget you a lot of the time, or they're often be very, very cold and then super, super hot, right? Because that reflects the way they work. They will be very cold with you until they need you, and then suddenly they will be all over you like a hot rash for a period because you're top of their priority list, and then going back to cold. So being aware of that, it's not about you, that behavior, it's about them and the way that they're working. But I think it's similar ideas, right? It's sort of the understanding why you might be relevant to them, having that sense of context of what it is about your profile that makes them interested in networking with you, because they're not going to do it probably just as a random favor. So thinking about the right person, finding the right hook, again, looking at that right trend that makes it super interesting to a VC fund to get to know you because, hey, you just took a company from Series A all the way to Series E or IPO, and you're now looking for your next gig. That's going to be a really interesting story for Index or Excel or whatever, because they're looking for those founders all the time versus, okay, I want to go get Silver Lake because I have a thesis that they're going to be investing in this new market because it's going to be super hot for the next 2 years or whatever it is. And therefore, like, I've got to find out the investor at Silver Lake, who is the individual who's going to be pushing that. So I think it's about targeting and understanding. Dan, anything I missed on that, or any you'd nuance?
I would just add, just make it clear, the fit as well, or understand your fit as well. If your LinkedIn profile only says, Amazon, Google, Meta, and then you're approaching an early stage VC, but you were actually, acquired in, or you were early at something that, and acquired in, but your profile doesn't say that, they're not going to know that. They're not going to necessarily see the fit, right? If you've only been at scale and you are approaching, a seed stage investor because you're looking for a role, or a Series A or Series B even, right, investor, they're not going to see the fit because they're looking for someone who has early stage experience. But if you were acquired in and your profile doesn't say that, that's important to articulate. It's just important to show the relevance.
That goes back, Dan, doesn't it, to our point around the resume or the LinkedIn profile, right? Like articulating out the bits that are most relevant and tailored to the people you're trying to attract, right? Because some people might want the FANG experience of Facebook, Amazon, experience, or some people might want the startup, right? And if you've done both, make sure it's there and easy to see, or always tailored towards the one job that you want to get, so you're not lost in the noise. Makes sense. And a third sort of application layer to job search is being up to date on your industry. And we talked about this, like last time, is sort of being aware of like if you're interviewing, actually, I think it's 2 episodes ago, we talked about interviewing, like having the killer answers or answering the killer questions is important. How can you be building that or proactively approaching knowledge around your industry so you're super impressive in an interview situation then?
I mean, there's a number of different areas to consume kind of news, trends, playing with technology. There's many different areas that kind of just show that you're up to date on what's happening. Maybe you've taken on an advisor role and you can articulate that as well, or you're doing something that's a little bit different. But generally, it's consuming the industry news, it's staying up to date on the trends through the articles, consuming podcasts. What else do you advise?
Well, I think to take one really concrete example, AI, you can't get through any conversation without bringing it up. Everyone wants it. Lots of people don't really understand it fully, or most people don't really understand it fully and its implications, etc. And it'll be a part of job specs we're getting. AI will be important, whether it's cost cutting, whether it's building new products, whatever it is. And candidates will say, I'm played around with ChatGPT a lot. And I'll be honest with you, it's not a great answer. It's not the worst. I don't want to demoralize anyone because I've had it myself. I just tell you, a lot of other people are giving that answer as well. So it's a non-differentiating answer, I would say. So that answer versus, hey, I vibe coded my own app, and I also went to a conference recently. I went to the Google DeepMind conference recently in London, and I heard the chief AI scientist talk about these 4 trends, and I think that's really interesting. And that correlates with the Andreessen Horowitz podcast I listened to on AI. And actually, I think Andreessen are wrong. I think Google are right. And yeah, something like that is starting to become much more compelling. So that ability to show you're in the flow, that you are researching, reading. Conferences, I think, are actually really good for that. I'm not a huge conference fan generally, but for networking, I think it's okay. But actually, if you're really actually invested in getting that deep expertise, you might just be able to say, hey, I spoke to the CEO. I caught them afterwards for a question. I said, why are you building data centers in France or whatever? Or I don't know, whatever it is, right? And they say, well, actually, we looked at the maths and it's not good. And I'll give you one concrete example. Recently, I was at a conference and somebody said, oh, these are the reasons why this area is successful for an industry. And I've been in another one. I talked to a CEO and they said, actually, we looked at that and that's a false premise. And I was able to then understand, okay, this person doesn't really know what they're talking about. If I was asked or a client was asked, I can articulate that. I'd have good answers that would be backed up by other experts that would reflects well on me without actually having the expertise. Because I can say, well, actually, X said this and it makes me look good, even though I'm relying upon somebody else's knowledge there. So I think those can be really good ways to elevate your answers up and understand. I mean, again, also just understanding what are the key trends that are really like the pressing issues. And you can reflect that back on an interview and say, hey, Microsoft are worried about this. Why aren't you? That's quite a powerful question. I can make a CEO sit up and say, oh, yeah, well, I don't know. Should I? Do I need you to tell me why I should? Suddenly you're the expert who's able to show to them another side. Or again, you still leverage that, which can be really powerful in interview application.
I think being up to date on the latest technology is incredibly important. I've been listening to a lot of product-focused podcasts lately, and they're all, talking about vibe coding. I think if you're listening to some tech marketing, they're probably going to be talking about AEO, how to advertise through the LLM, that kind of thing. Even if your company, well, maybe the better way to say this is, if you are interested in working for a company and maybe they have a culture around a specific kind of tool or tool set or some kind of products that they're using, just getting some familiarity with those products could also be helpful. Even if your company today, the one you're in today, just doesn't use them for some reason, being able to say, well, we're using this, but I have a really strong familiarity with this other thing, or I tested this as well, or we looked at implementing it, so I have familiarity with it, is often helpful. In bridging some maybe the tech gaps. Being able to say on the AI side that you use more than just ChatGPT is like incredibly important, because that's been table stakes. And so being able to go beyond that is important.
Also, actually, as we're talking, sometimes investing as well, doing angel investing, and can be done for really small checks or relatively small checks. You don't need hundreds of thousands of dollars. You can be doing it for sometimes $500, $1,000, something like that. If you're interested in a space, you can find a syndicate to join. Could just be a way of connecting with founders coming up the curve who are often doing very experimental or different things in the market. You can be advising them. You can be getting insights into that tech, or it can just, again, create a little bit of a variance in your network or in your knowledge base that can help you stand out or give you an interesting connectivity into something.
Absolutely. Great point.
I think we've covered a lot here really about sort of that approach to the market. So going back, we talked about resume, LinkedIn profile, the data you should be putting on there, making it easy to understand stories, if that's right, sort of understanding the narrative of your career. We've talked about the importance of networking. So we talked about the 4 areas of your network, you talk about your personal network, headhunter network, the companies you want to be connected with network, and then investors who are relevant to your space. And then we've talked about staying up to date with your industry, really being proactive about being in your space, being knowledgeable there. Any final thoughts from you, Dan? Anything that you really want to bring out from that as a key tip or anything you'd highlight from our conversation?
Well, I would just say we covered a lot. And then within each of those segments, I think we could talk for many more hours about each. And so if you're coming away from this with questions, or you want to know more about something, or you just want to talk about some kind of nuance, feel free to send us a LinkedIn message or an email, and we're happy to answer questions or try to talk through something, or simply cover that topic, those questions on the next podcast as well, so we can scale them a bit further.
Yeah, we'd love to hear that feedback. My question will be to Dan, what's inside baseball? You used that phrase, and I had no idea what that meant.
That's a spanner in the works.
It's a spanner in the works. Well, there we go. So I'm learning, Dan and I teach each other idioms from each other's countries, and that could be another area of learning from these podcasts. So thanks everyone for listening, and we look forward to the next session, which will be on the third part of the application, and that will be diving much deeper into that role of the headhunter that we touched upon there, but clearly is an area we know a lot about, so we can really go deep on how you can leverage headhunters and how they can be very helpful for you to get some of the very top industry jobs in the world.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. That's another episode of Mission 1, The Executive Edge. If you found this valuable, hit subscribe and leave us a review. It helps other professionals discover the show.
Have a question about executive hiring or want to share your own experience? Reach out on LinkedIn or visit mission1.io/podcast. We read everything, and your stories often inspire future episodes.
The Executive Edge is brought to you by Mission 1, where we specialize in placing senior leaders at tech, entertainment, and AI companies. Learn more at mission1.io.
Thanks for listening, and we hope to see you again soon on The Executive Edge.